A lot of people say it's a conspiracy theory, but now we know it's not a conspiracy theory. And that is things like the Great Reset Initiative, masterminded by Professor Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum. So we're seeing a lot more on this now. We're seeing announcements from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is not a charity. As I keep saying, people keep saying to me, no, they're a charity, they go and help all these countries. Guys, do your research on the IMF policies going around. Because you see, the Federal Reserve is not going to want to give up their position as the world reserve currency. And you have the ECB, the European Central Bank, you have China, you have other organizations like the IMF who want to take that position and create this, this global currency, as it were. If the IMF gets its way and being helped by the World Economic Forum and all these others, guys, we are going to just see some crazy things happen. Imagine the IMF, a private institution that it doesn't have people who are politically elected. These people are not elected officials who are running the IMF. Okay, they look at the titles, managing director, etc. This is a for-profit organization. If they get their way and they create this, let's just say they create a digital currency, a cryptocurrency as it were, things are going to just be, I think they'll be very bad, because it's just another step towards this one world government. And I know there's a lot of negative against it. I know there's a lot of positive. Right now, it's very hard to say what that would be like. But when you see things like tracking and chips implanted in the head and all this sort of stuff, you've got to ask yourself some questions about that. We've been warned. Let's just say there's a lot of warnings against getting these marks. And I won't say any more on that because I know some people disagree very heavily with that, but that is my belief. So let's just say, for example, that the United States or even the ECB, whoever we want to talk about here, the central bank created this CBDC, again, that's central bank digital currency. I don't think that they are just going to collapse the other currency. So the US dollar, that is a fiat currency. I don't think they would just collapse that. A lot of people say, well, what would the CBDC be backed by? Again, that's a tricky question, because you could say, what's Bitcoin backed by, right? It's not backed by gold, for example. Would they back the new CBDC by gold? And if they did, does that mean that your gold would be confiscated? These are all big questions that we don't exactly know the exact answer to right now. But there's a possibility of anything happening. And if anyone is going to back their CBDC by gold, I would say it would be China. Because China has been buying all the gold reserves from around the world at a rapid rate over the last decade. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were ahead of the game, which they usually are. And they've been planning for this for a long time in order to create their CBDC, which is backed by a gold standard. I personally think a gold standard is a good thing anyway. You have some drawbacks to it. But at the same time, look at the fiat currency we have now. Look at the wealth disparity that it has caused in our societies. There are pros and cons of every strategy here. But my biggest concern with this CBDC is that once that is in place, they will track every single coin or whatever you want to call it. They will track every single one of them. And they may even put limits and policies on those coins as to what you can actually spend it on. So what happens to those of you who have been saving for decades and decades, and you've got savings in bank accounts? What would happen to that money if there was a collapse, if there was a crisis? And that is the thing that you really need to think about and pay very careful attention to. Make a plan. Don't just leave it there, because whether you take action or not, you are still making a decision. If you take the action to remove that cash and buy some sort of assets with it, whether it's precious metal or whether you invest it in some way, that is an action. At the same time, if you decide to do nothing and you just leave it there, and then we do have some sort of a crisis, which, by the way, these crises occur every 50 to 70 years where we have collapses like this, right? You could just leave it there, and then what happens if there's just this huge collapse and the banks do collapse again? I've already talked on previous videos that I don't think there'll be bailouts next time. I think a lot of it will be bail-ins. That's where the bank just takes your money over a certain amount. And then if you're like me, this camera that I'm recording this on is a very modern top-of-the-range camera, but I also have an older camera, right? So this is the example here. The CBDC will be like my new camera. The fiat currency, your pounds or dollars in your bank account, they will be like the old camera. What do you like? What do you use? Well, as an owner, you want the CBDC. You want the new camera. That's what you're going to use. That's what you're going to promote. The old camera just loses value until it's almost worthless and the technology's gone. And I think something similar could happen to the currency that we have currently. So they could actually go side by side. They could still be operating together at the same time for a certain period of time. That is just everything. I would say probably, I'm not going to criticize you here, but maybe do some more research on these lockdowns. Number one, they do not stop the spread of the